Hi, hello again. I'm Helen Davis of One Step Forward, and I'm going live today with the second in a planned series of 12 lives talking about my recent diagnosis of osteoporosis and sharing my experiences as I find my way through what this means, what it doesn't mean, and what I personally am going to start doing about it, in the hopes that this may be of help to other people who find themselves in a similar situation. So, little bit of housekeeping. The first version of the first live I did kind of spontaneously, and I've now worked out a little bit more what I'm doing with these. So I'm calling this series Me and My Bones. And as I say, this is the second one. There will be a series of lives. Each one will be whatever length it ends up being. Some will be a lot shorter than others. I'm also accompanying them with a written blog post, which is basically going to have the same information in. So if you find that you prefer to read rather than watch video, which if I'm honest tends to be my preference, there's a link in the comments to my blog, and I will try and get the blogs online around the time I do a live. Bear with me if it takes a little bit longer. And I will also, for those who would like to share this with people who aren't on Facebook, I will also be sharing these videos to YouTube. Again, bear with me if it takes a little bit of time, but that's the intention. So, today I want to talk about the power of suggestion. And specifically, I want to talk about some of the things that I was told in the conversation I had, which was a phone conversation when I was given my diagnosis of osteoporosis. So I have got some notes here to keep myself on track. So excuse me if I'm looking away from you a little bit at times. But I want to talk you through what happened. And let me be clear, this is not a criticism of the nurse whose job it was to ring me with this very difficult news. Again, I always feel I have to say there is much worse news to receive. This was not and is not a life-threatening condition in the way that many things are. However, it's still not an easy thing to receive when you're not expecting it in your 50s, or indeed at any time. But the nurse who gave me the news was empathetic, she was kind, and she was doing her job in the way that she'd been trained to do it. I completely understand that. However, as you may know, I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, and I'm very aware of the power of suggestion. And some of the suggestions that she gave me, unwittingly, were anything but helpful. So before I explain what happened, I want to share another medical consultation with you that I had some 10 years ago. So a few months before that, I'd had a flu-like virus that I couldn't shake off. It was followed by a chronic exhaustion of a kind that I'd never experienced in my life, as if every ounce of energy had drained out of my body. I found it virtually impossible to navigate stairs, let alone do anything more active than that. And of course, I went to my doctor. Prior to this, I'd had very little contact with my GP other than picking up my regular repeat prescriptions for migraine medication. And I found that I seldom saw the same doctor twice. So I didn't have a doctor with whom I had a personal relationship. However, on this occasion, I got lucky. And I was seen by a wonderful GP who stayed with me throughout the process of what turned out to be post-viral fatigue syndrome is the diagnosis I was given, chronic fatigue, ME, whatever you want to call it. So that day that I'm talking about 10 years or so ago, she'd got the results from all the blood tests they'd done. She'd looked into everything. They couldn't find anything. And yet she knew that I was very ill. And therefore, the news she had to share with me was that she was diagnosing me with chronic fatigue, or rather, as I say, the official diagnosis I received was post-viral fatigue. But this is the important bit. Having told me that, she then looked me in the eye and she said, I know this is really hard, but you will get better. I can't tell you when, but I promise you, you will get better. And she was right. I did. Now, at the time, I didn't know much about the power of suggestion. But as you may know, I went on to train I went on to work with and then to train as a hypnotherapist. And as a result, I know a lot about the power of suggestion now. And I am 100% sure that if things had been that different that day, my last decade would have been very different. And it's highly likely I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you now. If I'd seen a different GP that day, and if that person had told me, I'm sorry, you have ME, there's no cure, but we might be able to find ways to help you manage it over the years to come. The impact words like that would have had on my belief in what my future held are enormous. Is enormous. And so all of that brings me back to my call with the nurse a couple of months ago. So it was obvious that I was very distressed by the news. I mean, I was in tears. My DEXA scan had shown that my bone density was of a level that meant there was a diagnosis of osteoporosis, no question about it. And as I mentioned, she was warm, she was caring, she was distressed that I was so distressed. However, she had information that she had to tell me. And one of the first things she said to me is, it's not possible to improve bone density. All we can do is try to slow the decline. And she didn't say that once. She said it at least 3 times in that call. Another thing she told me was that the biggest indicator of falling in the future is having fallen in the past. In other words, now that you've fallen once, you are much more likely to fall again. And obviously, the point being, when you fall, you are highly likely to break a bone. Both of those statements are really powerful suggestions, especially when they're made by an authority figure, so in this case, a medical professional. And especially when the person on the receiving end of those statements is in a state of shock, which means that their subconscious is open, and wide open, in fact, to receiving such suggestions of any kind. So it would have been really easy for me to just take those 2 statements as fact and assume that that is where I had to start from, just as I could have been told, chronic fatigue, ME, is incurable, there is nothing we can do, as opposed to, you will recover. And if I had taken those facts on board like that, or those statements as fact, that would have made a huge difference to how I move forward, what I felt my options were. Now, luckily for me, my training and experience over the past decade meant that my radar immediately noticed these suggestions and went, no thanks, not taking that one on board. And I was able to choose to let them both wash over me. I already knew that very recently I had broken 2 bones in my body, my wrists, and I knew that they had healed. So I could instantly give myself a suggestion, even as I was talking to her, that my bones are perfectly capable of repairing themselves. Now, we'll leave aside for now whether or not repairing after a break is the same as improving bone density. That's not actually the point. The point is that I could give myself a message that my bones are capable of rebuilding. Thank you very much. And I also knew enough about data to understand that whilst statistically she might be absolutely right to say that once somebody has fallen once, the probability of them falling again is high or higher. But just because that statistically is the case overall doesn't necessarily mean that it is the case in every individual situation. And I'm going to come back to that aspect of this in my next live, so I'm going to leave that there for now. What I did know, though, was that one thing that was going to make me highly susceptible to falling again was being afraid of falling again. So again, my understanding of the power of the suggestions that she made allowed me to take a step back, to say, I'm going to start from where I am. I'm not going to assume anything, and I'm going to start learning and doing my own research. That gave me the opportunity to reach my own understanding, my own conclusions. And don't get me wrong, it's early days. I am still learning. But I didn't start from the point of saying, there is nothing I can do, or there is nothing I can do to improve the situation. I can only mitigate the damage. And it also meant that I felt that I had an element of control. And this is so important. Any kind of situation we're in where it comes to our own health, when we can be engaged in the process, when we can feel that we have an element of control, we're in a position to be able to understand our options, to make choices, it's completely different from when we just allow the doctors to say, this is the only option. That doesn't mean that we don't end up going along with the advice we're given, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we do. And taking that element of control, being able to feel like an active participant in your own healing process, whatever form it takes, is absolutely crucial, because it stops the fear, it steps or reduces the fear, it stops us being terrified. And in the case of something like osteoporosis, it meant that I didn't instinctively do from day one what many people do, which is to become terrified of breaking a bone and therefore not do anything. And as we'll see over the next few weeks as I talk about the things I've been learning, the worst thing you can do in general, but certainly in a situation like mine where my break came from a very specific set of circumstances, the worst thing I could do at this point in my life would be to wrap myself in cotton wool and not do anything for fear of breaking a bone. And I will be exploring that more. So thank you. I do hope you're going to stay with me on this journey. Do share comments, thoughts, experiences, anything that you would like to, either in a comment or if you'd prefer to in a private message to me. I'd love to hear from you. And my next live, which will be early next week, will be looking at that issue of statistics, just understanding a little bit about how we have to be very careful to understand the context of the statistics we hear. So that's it for now. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you again soon. Take care.